hash out new payment terms. This is called a debt restructuring. And it's where the IMF comes in as this kind of monitor of the rules of the game when it comes to borrowing and lending on the global stage.
It's in everyone's interest to find, as soon as possible, a solution so that the country can actually get out of their debt trap, start growing, and be able to service the new debt.
But in this current debt wave, there's been a wrinkle in how these new payment terms get negotiated. Remember when we mentioned that governments borrow money from other governments? Well, it used to be that the major lenders were countries like the US or Germany or Japan.
And those countries, over many decades, developed this kind of informal playbook on how to deal with debt restructuring. They worked together on negotiations so that everyone got basically the same terms. So Germany wouldn't be able to get a better deal on repayments than the US, for example.
But here's the new wrinkle. Jayla says that today, there's a lot of new players on the scene that are loaning money to governments, countries like China and even private companies.
Now we see that the ratio of creditors such as China, India, Saudi Arabia, and some other countries have increased. Why is that important? Because we have mechanisms in the past to deal with debt distress when that happens. With the new creditors, that type of creditor coordination is not as established as before, and we have the...
So in other words, some of the countries might want to negotiate in their own way to get really good repayment terms for themselves. They might not want to work with the other lenders, and that could make debt restructuring even more difficult.
Given all of this, it's no wonder the IMF has been sounding the alarm on government debt as the global economy enters 2023.
In this very difficult period where we have a cost of living crisis in the world, this is really hitting the most vulnerable the most, and those countries need support.
So here are two ways the IMF is trying to provide that support and avert a cascade of defaults and messy negotiations. Number one, temporary breathing room and a debt pause. Early in the pandemic, the IMF talked to the G20 group of nations, that's major economies like the US, China, and the UK, and the IMF persuaded them to let low-income countries temporarily pause their debt payments.
It was urgently put together and provided relief to many countries. These are the poorest countries in the world as they were dealing with the pandemic.
And it's not forgiveness, it is relief and suspension, which means they just get more time to pay off their debts or they get better terms.
Correct. And that's a very important distinction, right? So they get temporary relief and there is a grace period and so on. But if countries are able to grow and get out of the pandemic-related and other problems that they face, then they will be able to get back on track and be able to service their debt.
The pause was about 18 months, but for some countries, that temporary relief wasn't enough for them to get back on track. Take Chad. In early 2021, Chad said it was still in trouble and couldn't pay back its creditors. Its lenders, by the way, included a bunch of those new players that Shayla mentioned, like China, India, Saudi Arabia, even a Swiss oil trading company called Glencore.
Chad's dilemma brings us to the second thing the IMF is doing to tackle this debt crisis. It's pushing a new playbook for debt restructurings that includes these new types of lenders.
This playbook is called the Common Framework, and under the system, the lenders agree to negotiate at the same table and get the same terms. So a country like Chad wouldn't need to have one set of talks with the Saudis, another with China, India, and also the oil trading company Glencore. And Shayla says getting private companies like Glencore to the table is what makes this new playbook especially unique.
So is it an opt-in kind of thing where you have to go to this private